I'm going to come at things today from a little bit different perspective. I'm going to bring a sociological approach and help you all understand how the world has changed, and it's never going to go back because of technology, and how it has rewired all of our expectations. And how you have to lead your organizations and teams completely different than how my generation was taught about what leadership looks like. In fact, almost everything that I was taught about leadership no longer is relevant. Because there is a sociological principle that says this: as technology increases, respect for authority decreases. As technology increases, respect for authority decreases. That does not mean that I become disrespectful of someone in formal authority. What it does mean, I become more respectful of what I believe I bring to the table. And if you do not ask for my input, 30 years ago, if you didn't ask for my input and the boss just said this is the way it was going to be, what did we do? We may not have liked it, but what did we do? You just did it. Because if you don't like it, there's the door. There's 15 other people waiting to take your job. Well, today that doesn't exist. As our economy has grown and the economic infrastructure has grown so much that people today have multiple opportunities, correct? And if you say if you don't like it, there's the door, what are they most likely to do? Go to the door and wish you a happy birthday. And the other thing is this: when my boss didn't ask for my input, I didn't like it, but that was about it because I understood the rules of the game. Today, we are now dealing with the latter three generations. My doctorate is understanding generational differences in the marketplace and how that leads to trust. And there is no such thing as leadership without trust in today's environment. It used to be leadership was based on competence. Leadership was based on position, and leadership was based on knowledge. None of those three things apply anymore, because who has access to unlimited knowledge today? Everybody. And no longer does authority matter because of what I just shared with you earlier. And so if you're going to lead today, you have to have a team that is included in your decision-making process. Did you hear that? In fact, today, there is no such thing as an effective team that is not a consensus-led team. Now, in a moment, I need to explain what that is and what it's not. And if you don't include me, not only am I not going to like it, I am going to feel disrespected to the core of my being. And when someone is disrespecting us, how do we feel about that person? Talk to me. We don't like it. And as a result, you will not, there is no such thing, and I want you to hear this. There is no such thing as a psychological safe team that is not consensus-led. That did not used to be true, but it is today. Because in a top-down environment, it's either my way or the highway. And people in teams that are not safe will never be real. And when you're not real and someone asks you for advice in front of that team to solve a problem, what do you do when you don't feel safe? You hold back and you say nothing. Oh, by the way, you will say something, but it won't be in that meeting. Where will it be? In the meeting after the meeting. Healthy teams do not have meetings after the meeting. Did you hear that? Healthy teams, the meeting is the meeting. Healthy teams, if there's something on my mind, we're going to put it on the table right there. And there is no room for putting someone down because they disagree with you. You want a healthy team is a place that it is flourishing with ideas. You see, in today's world, let me teach you something. Remember the old contract? It used to be you either have speed in the consumer contract that our nation operated by for years. You had one or the other. You either had quality or you had what? Speed. But we understood if you're going to get quality, you're going to have to what? You're going to have to wait for it. Now, if you get speed, we also know that we shouldn't expect what? Quality. What the rise in technology has done, it has changed that dynamic in the minds of every man and woman. Today, because as technology increases, specialization increases and expectations increase. And so we live in a society today that it's not speed or quality, it's what? Speed and quality. And if you can't deliver it, you will not be competitive in today's marketplace. And that is where the whole aspect of decision making that I want to talk to you about comes in. I was fortunate to have been mentored. How many of you have ever heard of Dr. Edwards Deming? Deming was the founder of what is called today the lean process. The lean process today is the number one efficiency system. It's used in medicine, it's used in education, it's used in manufacturing. And what he did after he was kicked out of GM, along with my partner, who I'm going to talk about in a moment, they were told in the United States of America, team-based leadership will never work. People close to the product, close to the line, are not smart enough. The only ones who can make decisions are the ones who are up in the every tire, who have a master's degree or a PhD. Literally, that's what they were told. They were kicked out. They went all over the world to find one team, one company that would even talk to them. Just one. And guess which company said, we'll take a risk, we'll talk to you. Who was it? It was Toyota. And together, Dr. Deming and my original partner and mentor, Rosetta Riley, spent the next 23 years developing the lean process in Toyota that spread all over Japan and then spread all over the world. And so she taught me when I was in my early 30s, and I was her pastor of a mega church in Detroit. This incredible lady who had come back and led Cadillac, Jack Smith at the time was the chairman, and he said to her, look, Rosetta, there's never been a team-based product made in America, and I want us to be the very first one. And so we're about to start this project called the Cadillac STS. You remember that? And if you will create that well, we want to see that as the prototype that will lead us to a new company that we want to start called Saturn. And so Rosetta led a team, and they used team-based leadership, consensus-based principles to build the first product in America, and it won them an award called the Malcolm Baldrige Quality Award. In 1991, if you won the Malcolm Baldrige Quality Award, it meant you were the elite of the elite of the elite. You were the best in America of what a great company looks like. and they want it. President Bush Sr. calls her and says, Rosetta, look, we think that you can make the Baldrige Foundation that actually wins the award, issues the award, we think you can make it even better because you are the leading female expert in leadership in corporate America today. Will you take on and become the head of the Baldrige Foundation? I was 34 years old, sitting at her kitchen table in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. Think about this. And she and I had the opportunity to write down at her kitchen table the 6 criteria of what world-class excellence means. Sitting there watching brilliance in front of me. It was heady stuff for a 34-year-old kid in ministry who had no background in business. One of the things that she taught me was this. World-class teams, and when I say world-class, gang, I'm not just throwing this out, I mean world-class. World-class teams separate themselves from everybody else by 2 things. You ready? It's going to sound simple, but it's not. The first is how they deal with issues. Here's what that means. They deal with their issues. They are not afraid of leaning in on conflict. They don't have drama in their companies because they deal with issues with their team at a crumb level before it turns into Thanksgiving dinner. How many of us have ever been a part of a team that the conflict turned into Thanksgiving dinner? What's it like? It's not something you get up enjoying going to work for. And what we know is the vast majority of teams today are amazingly dysfunctional. And there is drama all over the place. And drama is a mission killer. It is a focus eraser. But we're not going to really talk about that today because I want to focus on the other part. By the way, there is no way in the world in 75 minutes that I can possibly go into any kind of depth about this subject matter. But if I can plant enough seeds, I'm sorry, but I'm not as smart as the guy today who said, I'm going to change your life. I'm not that good to do it in 55 minutes. But if I can put some seeds in your head to say, wow, there's so much more to this. And I want to be the best that I can be. I want to make an impact. I want to learn more than that. This thing is whetting my appetite, then we've succeeded. But the second differentiator of world-class teams was not only did they deal with their issues before the issues dealt with them, the second was this, how they make decisions. You see, in a world that demands both speed and quality, there are 2 things that have to be better. You have to start operating by a team now. Because when you're expected to have quality input at record speed, and you've been the one person all this time who had the ideas, suddenly you don't get that much smarter overnight. And so you've got to rally a lot more brain power around you. And that brain power has to work in synergy with each other. And all that brain power has to make decisions that are clear, that are consistent, and are compelling. And so in a few moments, what I want to do is this. I want to show you that world-class companies and organizations, they behave differently and they make decisions differently than most of us in this room. Oh, I had someone say today, Fred, when I heard you speak in 2019, I got the impression that you work with these monumental companies, and I'm just a little guy of 2 or 3 folks, and I didn't think that we could touch you. By the way, what I'm teaching you right now applies even more to a company of 4 people as opposed to 400,000 people. It applies at every level. And so let me say this. What we found in world-class teams is this: they are intentional about everything they do. They know who their clients are and who they're not. They know what services that they're going to provide and which ones that they're not. I liked what Gino said today. World-class teams are those companies that don't try to be all things to all people. If you are an organization that tries to be all things to every client, you will end up being nothing to all clients, and you will lose yourself in the meantime. Great companies are laser beams, they are not shotguns. And conversely, world-class leaders live laser beam lives, not shotgun lives. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run through this. Will you let me do that? Because I want to spend the last 15 minutes just being ricocheted with questions. So we teach 3 different methodologies in how to be a laser beam, world-class focused in our decision making. We make decisions that are deep. We make decisions that have passed the scrutiny of lots of questions. And we make decisions that are fast. When you're able to do that with your team, you will win your marketplace. So the first thing that we do, what we found with the Baldrige companies, and we were talking back then Motorola, we were talking Corning, we were talking Cadillac, we were talking IBM, we were talking Boeing. Those were the companies that behaved like I'm about to talk. They all had a very, very clear methodology by how they made decisions, and we call it a decision frame. And here's all your decision frame is. Look, I'm from West Virginia. We don't do technology like all these PowerPoint folks. I just learned how to use a telephone instead of the can and the string about 3 weeks ago. And I am not a hillbilly. I have a doctorate. You call me Hill William, okay? But I don't do technology, so you're going to have to go with me. So I want you to draw an upside down triangle. At the very top line, write the word purpose or vision on the top line. On the second line down, write the term values. On the third line down, write the term critical goals, CG. And then from CG, put a vertical line that goes to the bottom of that pyramid, so you got 2 little boxes at the bottom. On the right, write PTR for pay the rent. On the left, write DPTR for the dark side of pay the rent. And let me explain. Whenever you're making a decision, the first question of world-class companies and leaders, whether it's for their personal lives or for their organizations, they ask this question: is what we are about to do on purpose? Is it squarely within our vision? If the answer is yes, we continue to consider it. If it is no, the answer is no, quit, move on. Now here's the challenge with that. I've heard all day about purpose, purpose, purpose. You all, it sounds, I loved what Scott was talking about, butterflies and rainbows. You heard that? I wanted to come up here and just go like this. Thank you, Scott. But you all, when we mean by purpose, a decision frame is what we call, you make decisions against it. How many of you have ever seen a company vision statement that it was 17 paragraphs long and you had no idea what it meant? A great purpose statement is no longer than one or two sentences that you ought to be able to repeat with ease between the first and second floor of an elevator ride. And you ought to be able to make any significant decision against that. Our vision statement, our purpose statement is this: the global leader in transforming organizational potential through accelerated personal and professional growth. That's it. But every word means something. I'm 63 years of age. Many people, my dad used to say, by the time you're 63, you ought to be landing your plane. My plane's just taken off. Once a month, we provide a complimentary leadership gift to leaders all over the world, by the way, that you are invited to attend virtually. And we rent out a room. We built a $4 million training center in downtown Green Bay. We ran out of room within 4 years. We had to build a new auditorium to hold all the people that were coming. You all, when you're 63 years old, you don't invest $4 million into your business. You're thinking about exit planning. But you know what? What it says, being the global leader, you know what that causes our team to have to do? We better be big thinkers. And every time we start to fall into fear, what if this happens? And we say, guys, if we keep thinking like that, in 15 years, we will have be no close at all to being a global leader in what we do. We've got to have courage, excuse the language, but we got to have balls. And you're not thinking big enough. We use that. That's why we're investing in our growth when other people are playing it safe. We have a culture, as our bank president says, that you guys have taken wild-ass risks for 15 years. And it's part of our culture now. You guys with me? But here's the problem. Less than 1% of companies even know their purpose, much less make decisions against it. And gang, if you are not making decisions by your purpose, you are making decisions by everybody else's noise. Some of us here resemble the game of ping pong. One day you're here, the next day you're here. One day you're here, the next day you're here. The ball's going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And by the end of the game, it's no further than how far from where it started? 6 feet. There are some of us here who are not leading. We are the ping pong ball that everybody else is playing. You see, here's what we learned. In our work over 23 years with over 400 organizations in 21 different fields, this is going to surprise you. The vast majority of companies do not make decisions. They make reactions. When you are deciding, you are in charge. When you are reacting, the other person is in charge. And what we have found is most organizations make their daily reactions by these 4 things. Ready? Politics, pressure, pain, and personality. Politics, pressure, pain, and personality. That's not how great companies operate. Leading edge companies make a decision on 2 things. Does it fit principle, and is it within our purpose? Does it fit principle, and is it within our purpose? And principle always wins over the other 4. Always. And I'm willing to pay a short-term price to protect principle and purpose every single time. And that requires courage to do that. How do you quit being a ping pong ball that gets played by everybody else? The first question is, does it fit our purpose? Now listen, here's what I mean by purpose. It's those things that bring you the highest impact with the greatest joy with the least amount of effort. Did you hear that? It's both personally and professional. It's those things that bring you the highest joy with the greatest impact with the least amount of effort. You are on purpose as a company when you are in your sweet spot. And I'm not going to tell you today how you figure out your purpose. I don't have the time. That's why we have a very extensive process that within 9 weeks, our clients can tell you in 2 words, mine is accelerating change. In 2 words, what your purpose statement is, and to begin to teach you how to make intentional decisions against your purpose every single day. The second is purpose. If it fits the purpose, then we stay with it for a consideration. The second level is values. You see, the purpose is who and where. The purpose is where and why. The value statement is who are we going to be in the midst of getting there. It's 3 to 6 non-negotiable values. And let me tell you something. There is a price for values. There is a price if you violate your values. There is a price if you stay within your values. You're going to pay a price. The question is, how much do you want to pay and how long you want to pay? I know many leaders who will violate their values in the moment for a profit. I know many leaders who will allow their company to become ethical for short-term gain. You see what they were willing to say? I'm not willing to walk away from short-term gain. Those folks are going to pay a long-term price. This is going to date me. When I was a kid, there was a commercial called STP. Some of you remember it? Why is all of you guys who are raising your hand have no hair? And with STP, they said you either pay now or you what? You pay later. If you're willing to violate your values for short-term gain, you will pay the loss of integrity, you will pay the loss of credibility with your team and with your customers. But if you stay within your goals, within your vision, just like our gentleman said this morning, if it's outside of your values, the answer is always what? No. Maybe every decision will not fit every value. But if it violates a single value, you either better have a conversation with someone to get it in alignment or you walk away. Now, when you're in a leadership position, you know leadership is messy. Would you agree with that? And what I've learned in my years of living is that there's very few things that are black and white, cut and dried, simple or hard. Most of life is lived where? Not black and white, but where? In the gray area. And the reason why values are important, they are those rules that you've agreed to before you ever get into the stadium, the place where emotion and surprises happen. And how many times have we ever had to be faced with the decision that no matter what we do, there's going to be a consequence? There's no perfect decision. Have we faced that? And the higher you get in your leadership, the more you face those kinds of decisions. And here we tell people this. When you're about to make a decision that no matter what you do, you're going to have a headache, you always let your values make the decision for you. You always let your values make the decision for you. Those values that you as a team determined when you were in a place of objectivity and study and research, that this is when we're at our best, and these are the non-negotiables of our company. This is our culture. This is what we stand for. And the third, if it passes the value test, if it passes the purpose test, it's critical goals. You know why many companies fail? Because they say yes to too many things. I love what the gentleman said this morning. Most organizations fail because of overcommitment to too many initiatives. I was working with a major school district, and the school district superintendent said, "I'm in trouble, Fred." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because my community is enraged with me because 3 years ago, we had an entire community effort that we built the strategic plan for our district for the next 10 years. And we're in the year 3, and we haven't, and our community is saying that we haven't met a single one of our critical goals." And I said to him, "Well, Glenn, how many critical goals did you have?" He said, 16. 16? I said, "How did you do that?" He said, "Well, we were there on the weekend, and we had several hundred people there, and we knew that they were all sacrificing their time. So if someone had an idea, we just said what? Yes." I said, "Because you wouldn't say no then, people are saying no to you now." The average organization cannot do any more than 2 major initiatives at any one time. Sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 1. And those critical goals are those things that will take a ton of effort, and it will take up 20% of your leadership time's efforts and energy over 2 to 3 years. But it will be transformative for your future. Your critical goals are about making your future completely transformed. And the problem is, because they're always facing the future, most organizations, when they get caught up in the moment of the latest fires and the latest crisis and whoever is yelling at them, the pressure, the personality, they take their future plan and they put it on the shelf. We'll get back to it later. So if it's within your critical goals, the answer is, yeah, we've got to make sure that doesn't get neglected. And if a great critical goal comes along that life presents, and you've already come up with your 2, you don't go, "Well, let's just pile the 3rd one on." Here's the question you ask. What's the question? If we've just adopted a new critical goal that's a major initiative that's going to require a ton of our resources and time and energy for the next 2 to 3 years to adopt that big thing that will transform our future, and you just came up with a 3rd one, which of the first 2 have to go? That requires discipline. You guys with me? And then you have pay the rent. Pay the rent you don't make a decision on, you do it. Pay the rent is 50 to 60% of your team's time, and it never goes away. It's not sexy, but pay the rent is where you execute on a daily basis, and your team comes through, and that's where you meet your brand promises to your customer every single day. It's not going to make your future better, but it won't allow you to have a future if you're not executing well. You with me? The devil is in the details. 50 to 60% of your time every day as a team is spent in pay the rent. If you don't pay the rent well, you will not have a purpose. And then we have the dark side of the pay the rent. And the dark side of the pay the rent is all those things that you're doing just to get someone off your back. Have you ever done that before? Just to do something so someone doesn't yell at you. Just to do something so that in your board of directors meeting, someone that has it out for you is not going to come down on you. Those things that we do just so that person who's threatening to go to somewhere else doesn't leave. The dark side of pay the rent is where we used to do customer timelines of how they use their time with CEOs. We asked their CEOs, how much of your time is spent up in the critical goals, the 1s and 2s that will give you 80% of your impact towards your future. You need to be spending 20% of your time there over time. And how much of you are spending on 3 through 7s? And how much of you are down in 8, 9s, and 10s? And we had them from Monday through Friday write down all the things that they did, and we asked them to grade those scales. I do this much in 1s and 2s, I do this much in pay the rent, and I do this much in 8 through 10. And the 8, 9s, and 10s, you all, will only give you no more than 3% of your impact, but they will take up 80% of an emotional time of a team. We asked these great leaders how they did their time, and guess where we found the vast majority of where every one of them spent their time? Where was it? 8 through 10. They said, we are living in reaction every single day. Does that sound familiar? How many of us struggle with 8 through 10s? We have 8 through 10 people in our lives. We have 8 through 10 clients. You know what let me give you the characteristics of an 8 through 10 client. Would that help you? Here they go. Number 1, they want it all. Number 2, they want it now. Number 3, they want it cheap. Number 4, they are not afraid to skip the line. They always think that they are your only daggone customer that matters. Do you know those folks? The next one is they are high maintenance. And it's never a win-win. It's always, they're narcissists. It's always about me. They're the ones that are crying the most all the time. Feed me, feed me, feed me. And you have the worst margins with them every single time. And here's the biggie. They are completely transactional. No loyalty whatsoever. And if someone can come along and deliver what you're doing for a penny less, what happens? They're gone. Oh, they do refer clients to you. Guess who they refer to? They refer their buddies. Hey, you ought to go over there to that wealth management firm. They put up with my crap. I literally had a company in Cleveland, Ohio that dealt with alloys from Russia and Eastern Europe. And here's what their clients were saying to me. Whenever those two guys, those two principals get in the room, we know they will never tell us no because they're afraid of losing our business. And we negotiate them down to the point that we don't even know how they can exist. And we know it because they're gutless. Wow. I want to ask you a question. Are you leading by your purpose, or are the 8s and 10s in your business playing you like a ping pong ball? We have 8 through 10 people, and I'm not talking about their value as people. I'm talking about how they pull you off your purpose, and they distract you, and they keep you from winning. We have them, don't we? I'm telling you how you say no to people. Let me tell you intentionally how we say yes to people. Our success is not based on how good we are. Our success is based on who we say yes to and who we say no to. And we've learned over the years of who to say no to. First of all, if you're an 8 through 10, saranara, baby. And I don't care if you've been our best friend or you've been in a family for 15 years and you want something. If you're an 8 through 10, the answer is always what? No. The other is what we call a psychographic. Have you ever heard of that term? Here's a psychographic. Sit down with your team and ask this question. Think of the very best client experiences that you ever had. Using these criteria, that you loved working for them. It was a joy working with them. It was like working with a friend. And that there was deep trust in that relationship. That there was high productivity, there was high profitability, that you enjoyed it, There was, and it was an incredible engagement. What were the characteristics of your all-time best engagements? That if you could have 20% of them as your customers, they would create 80 to 90% of your revenue. We call them partners, not vendors. We go all over the world teaching organizations what I'm teaching you right now. If you're going to be a great company, you've got to surround yourself not with vendors who are transactional, but with partners who will have your back. And they will be with you no matter what, and they look for win-win, and they are incredible loyal, and they will be your best sales force. That's who great companies work, and they fit your psychographic. So your psychographic is going to be different than mine. But here's what our psychographic is. One, in the dating process, are they showing us respect? When we are both in an environment where we have very specialized information and knowledge as the basis of what we bring to the table. Would you agree with that? And how many of us have ever gone into an initial conversation and we felt like the other guy was controlling, the other person was saying, I know more than you do, and I just want to see if you're up for it. Have you ever been around those folks? So the first thing we ask is, do they respect us? Do they follow? Do they return our phone calls? Do they talk with us as that we are trusted advisors, or do they talk down to us? Is there a level of arrogance from that person coming back that I'm doing you a favor by giving you time? If we pick that up, we check it off, not respectful. The second one is this: do they beat us up on price? You see, you guys and us, we are in what we call the quality service world. When you're in quality and service, you have to invest in your people, you have to invest in expertise, you have to invest in the long term, and it takes money and investment to have a quality and service field. Would you agree? And there will be some people say, I don't care if you're quality and service, I just want it cheap. And so if they beat us up on price, if they are disrespectful to us, if a CEO sees our process as an HR project instead of a long-term strategic capital investment to transform your culture, if they see it as a project, or if the CEO is not bought into it, and lastly, the CEO, the leadership team says, we don't have time for it, but everybody else is going into it. Those are the 5 things we look for. I walked away in 2000 from a $10 million contract with Boeing. You know why? Because right there, the guy violated all 5, his name was Phil Condit. I didn't say condom, I said condit. He was a condom. Right there, he violated all 5. And I said, and they had 25,000 engineers walk out the week before in Spokane. And Condit gets on the phone. Think about this. I get a phone call out of nowhere from Phil Condit, CEO of Boeing, saying, would you get your butt up here? I hear that you are very skilled in transforming dysfunctional cultures. And we need help. We had 25,000 engineers walk off the job yesterday, and we're in trouble. Can you come? I said, yes. I got up there. I said, I need 3 days to bring my team in here, and we need to talk to a bunch of your folks down in Spokane and find out what the deal is. Here's what we found out. Phil Condit and his leadership team were the problem. They were known as being unethical. They were known as leading Boeing away from their core values that they had had for years. And they were known as unethical scumbags. That's what I heard. So I go back the next day. And Phil Condit says, can you fix us? And I said with great confidence, absolutely not. On the outside, I look confident. On the inside, what do you think I was doing? Oh my gosh, I hope I'm not screwing up my future. And I said, Mr. Condit, with all honesty, here's what I'm hearing. The reason why 25,000 people walked off the job yesterday had nothing to do with money. It was a desperate protest move to get your attention. And what I heard is they've lost confidence in you, sir, because they believe that you are leading the company away from the ethical guidelines that made Boeing Boeing. And then he said, "Do you know who I am?" I said, "I'm learning." And he said, "Okay, no one comes in here and talks to me like this. I appreciate your courage, kid." He goes, "Just want you to know my leadership team can't do it. We don't have time. It's just all them that has the problem." I said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Condit, but if you're not willing to lead the charge and have your team go through it, we're not doing it." Gang, I'm just a small, tiny company at that point, just trying to pay the bills. And I walked, and he said, "Well, what are you going to do?" I said, "Sir, we can't take it." Walked away from a $10 million contract. The next day, front page of the Washington Post. Phil Condit indicted for payola with an officer in the U.S. Air Force, where they had made a deal to hire that person, that if you give us a contract, after the dust is settled, we will make you an executive on our team. And she went to prison, and he lost his career. And I went, whew. When you stay with your values will never lead you astray. You with me? That's being intentional. So you trust your decision frame, you trust your psychographic. And every time, if we have 3 out of the 5 checks, we will say we need to have a conversation. If we see 4 or 5, our team has been taught, run. We have not had a failure with a team in the last 6 years. You know why? Because we've learned how to have the courage to make courageous decisions to protect our values. You all, if you will make intentional decisions, you will win. What we know from the days with Baldrige was this: the most impactful leaders, the most impactful companies are always intentional. They are always intentional. They stay with their values, they stay with their purpose, they stay with their critical goals. Oh, and if you're an 8 through 10, the answer is I'm sorry, but we're not doing business with you. I can't tell you how many, just like the gentleman today, how many speaking engagements we get that I tell our people, no, we can't do it. And it's not about how much money we get paid. I have done speaking engagements free gratis if there were enough decision makers in that room that those folks could influence thousands of other people. It's all about impact. You with me? I want to make sure that I've caught everything. Oh, I'm going to ask you 3 quick questions. And I want you to soak about it. We're not going to be able to get deep into it. There's 3 more questions about decision making you need to think about. So far, we've been talking about the over-the-table methodologies. In every room of 2 or more people, and if you're schizophrenic, you can do it all by yourself. There are always 2 agendas. The first agenda is what we're here for. The official agenda. The official over-the-table agenda here is we are here for leadership development with Dr. Fred the Hillbilly. That's over the table. In every meeting of 2 or more people, there's a second agenda. It's not over the table, it's where. And it's what everybody is thinking, but no one is saying. And whenever the under the table collides with the over the table, with your team, what always has the greatest power? Every time under the table. And so I want to talk to you about 3 under the table things. They are relational and emotional. They are not technical. They are harder to do than anything I've talked about in the last few minutes. 3 things that we see kills decision making in every company. Number 1, do you have enough self-belief that you are making courageous, principled decisions? Some of you have heard me say that the average level of self-belief of the typical American leader, our own research out of North Carolina State also showed this, the average leader in America has a self-belief level from 0 to 10 of 2.7. I hope people don't find me out. I hope they don't figure out how much self-doubt. I hope I had 2.7 moments coming up here. I was listening to that tornado this morning from 8 to 9:30. He was all over the place. He wore me out. And I'm going, I can't do that. I can't have that kind of energy. They're going to laugh me off the stage. He talked about process. I'm going to talk about process. Oh my gosh, I'm going to bomb. That was my 2.7 coming up here telling you not to be at 2.7. It's so insidious. And what we know, if you're going to be an effective leader, and there are methodologies to do it, this is what we do, you have to transform your self-belief over time from 2.7 to an 8. At 8, I am enough. At 2.7, I'm not enough. At 8, when I hire people, I want to be surrounded by people who are smarter than I am, and I am not intimidated. In fact, I go, yes. At 2.7, what kind of people do I hire? Ones, people who you can dominate, people who are weenies, who are never going to talk back to you. People who would just say, tell me what to do, it's not my fault. That's a 2.7 company. And guys, there are 2.7 companies who make decisions based upon 2.7 that I'm not enough. I've got a company right now that a few years ago I was coaching their CEO. They had one 8 through 10 customer that was bringing in $800,000 a year of their total investment and of their revenue, and they were on the verge of going out of business. And these people were abusive. They were bullies, and he was losing money on every single pet bed he made for this company. And I looked at him and I said, Bob, they're an 8 through 10. Why are you doing this? And he said, Fred, if we say no to them and stand up and set boundaries, they're going to leave. And I said, if they leave, you're making money now on everything you're not making. Said, Bob, why don't you have the guts and reset that relationship and say, number 1, you're not going to abuse our people on the phone. Number 2, we're going to renegotiate the margins of this deal so that we can both win and survive. Number 3, we are going to start looking for win-win. And he goes, I can't do that. I worked with him. One day he called me and said, Fred, we did it. I was scared to death, but I told that guy we're no longer doing business with him. 2 years ago, after working with him for 3 years, they went to a bank that we had recruited because his previous bank had done a workout. They didn't even want him because he had missed profitability for 6 years in a row. We found him a new bank. 2 years ago, they were 29 times more profitable than they were 2 years ago. How? He learned how to say no to 8, 9s, and 10s because he realized he didn't have to put up with 2.7 crap anymore. It makes a difference. Here's another question. Are you acting like an 8.0 company or are you acting like a 2.7 company? Here's the second one. Do you have sacred cows in your team that you know are violating your values, that are undermining your leadership? They don't believe in your company. They don't believe in the team. All they are narcissists who are just thinking about themselves. Do you know people in your company like that? And everybody's talking about them. But you also know they have some kind of sick influence in your team, and they are running your company from under the table. And most leaders do not have the guts to barbecue the sacred cow. There is no such thing as permanently changing the culture of your organization and the destiny of your future if you're not willing to barbecue the sacred cow. So, Christmas, we're working with a $200 million a year pizza company. And we do our discovery. And one guy's name kept coming up over and over and over, and his name was Dave. And Dave was in charge of the plant that made the pizzas. And Dave was an absolute raging maniac. And if you made any decision outside of David's knowledge and permission, there was hell to pay. And we found that he had created an entire plant that was scared to death of him. And no one was making a decision. And so I sit down with Chad. He's 6'9", about 280 pounds. And I said, Chad, you got a major problem on your team. You got a sacred cow. And the impression of your workforce is you don't have the courage as a leader to deal with it. And he's running your organization, not you. He said, well, Fred, I know that. I'm going to manage it until next January when he retires. I said, are you nuts? I said, when are you going to stop managing conflict and start leading conflict? When are you going to quit dancing around the edges and have the guts to be a leader here and call him on it? The guy needs to go. Morale is crashing. Your profitability is hurting. And most of all, your integrity as a leader is in doubt because people see you as a big weenie. I'm sorry, Chad. But that's the truth. He goes, help me, Dr. Fred. With 1 week later, he was out. 3 weeks later, he calls me. True story. And he says this, Fred, I don't know how it happened, but in 3 weeks, our pizzas have gone from 110,000 units a day to 146,000 pizzas a day. And Fred, you know how it happened? I said, how, Chad? He said, they're all making decisions now. When we're running out of dough, they say, call the dough guy instead of waiting until Dave shows up after his vacation. When a piece of machinery goes down, we're fixing it instead of waiting for Dave so he doesn't yell at us. When the pepperoni runs out, we're actually going and we're saying, go to Minneapolis on the fly, buy that load of pepperoni and get back here. Those little tiny decisions over and over compiled onto others. You know what that meant? 36,000 more pizzas a day at $5 a pop in pure profit, 220 business days a year. He was making $39,600,000 more projected at the end of the year because he had the guts to deal with an 8, 9, and 10 and start leading by his values and barbecue a sacred cow. Decision making does change your bottom line. It's not touchy-feely crap. It's great business. Is this helpful? So I've got 10 minutes. You got some questions? There's some folks. Yes, sir. Talk loud before that microphone gets to you. Oh, thank you.
Uh-oh.
The first one, what was the first one? You talked about ADD, I got it too. What was the first one? Self-belief. The second one? And the third is your perfectionism killing your team? Is your perfectionism so out of line that if your team doesn't do exactly what you don't want, they won't make a decision? Gang, I'll tell you a quick story, and then we'll come back to you, sir. I'm teaching this all over the country. And I didn't realize until 3 years ago, we have grown by 5 times in the last 3 years where we were. 5 times. And you know what caused it? Me getting out of the way. My worst leadership trait is my perfectionism, by far. And I'm an expert in what I do. So my team would come up, hey, Fred, we need to do this. And I'd go, nope. And I'd give them 10 reasons why it was wrong. And I was right every single time. And I had this non-negotiable, and this non-negotiable, and this is not going to change. And one day, I overheard a conversation between 2 of my key people. And here's how it went. Hey, have you run that by Dr. No yet? Whoops. I knew right then I wasn't practicing when I preach. And so here's what I started doing. As you can tell, I'm a person of, just like the guy did today, drivenness and high intensity. And every time I said no, I'd have this visceral reaction. What I literally started doing was every time I had a visceral reaction, I started disciplining myself to say, nope, stop, get curious. What's the worst that could happen? You all, every single major innovation in my company in the last 3 years happened from an idea that I had nothing to do with. And Dr. No had to get the heck out of the way. There are a bunch of Dr. No's here. And you're keeping your team from the freedom of speaking their minds and letting creativity flourish. Are you a perfectionist that's killing the decision-making freedom of your team? Is your self-belief causing you not to make courageous decisions? And what's the other one? And are you barbecuing sacred cows? If you want to talk about that further, by the way, in that process, that's what we taught Scott and his team. And we'll teach you too. So, Mr. Anal Engineer, have I answered all your questions? Yes, sir. Excuse me for being so rudely interrupted by this gentleman who's bigger than me and runs faster than me.
That's all right. I deal with engineers too, so.
Okay, talk to me.
So my first comment is, I think the most powerful thing that you talked about today was the whole fact of being intentional, the whole notion of being intentional. I think some of the things that got buried in your comments about team, and we've all seen this when there's dysfunctional teams and dramas in teams, one of the reasons that happens is because the company was not intentional about putting those teams together. Right. Too often these teams are just randomly assigned, and that undercuts any potential for good leadership. So when you have a good team, it could be all the background intentional stuff that happened to pick the right people for the team, the right people in the right seats on the bus. So my question is this, what do you tell people to do when they need to lead up? They work for Phil Condit. They work for Chad. How do you get people to lead above their level?
They have to find their voice and they have to start being true to themselves. The highest level of leadership, self-leadership, is having the integrity to speak your mind and use your own voice to speak your truth. That's what we teach people. You got to find voice. In every healthy company, there are 3 kinds of accountability. There's top down, there's bottom up, and there's sideways. By the way, if I don't have the courage to challenge my superior, I am certainly not going to have the courage to challenge my peers. And so basically what we have to do is teach them. The reason why I'm not going to have that conversation is I am at 2.7 who does not believe that I'm enough, and that if he fires me or she fires me, I have no choices. When you start realizing you're enough, you have a ton of choices. And if you have to keep your job and you have to violate yourself to keep it, you're in the wrong place to work. How many of us were here 2 years ago when I talked about what I said to the general manager of the Seahawks? You guys remember that? He'd been fired by the Redskins owner, Dan Snyder, real peach of a guy. And he had come back and he was working with the Packers now, and he had lost his voice. He was a savant in terms of talent. He's now the second leading general manager in the NFL after Bill Belichick and winning for the last 12 years. And he comes to me one day and he says, Ted Thompson is my general manager. He's not taking my recommendations, and I'm thinking about getting out of the business. And I looked at him and I said, John, why aren't you challenging Ted? He said, because the last time that I ever spoke the truth, I got fired by Dan Snyder, and I just can't do it. I got to feed a family. And you remember what I said to him? Wonderful moment in my life. So, John, when did you become a prostitute? He goes, excuse me? I'm offended by that. I said, I'm offended by you. With all these gifts, you're telling me that you are allowing yourself to be violated and your voice to be silenced every single day because you need the damn money. How is that any different than a prostitute? To this day, he texted me the other day before the draft and he says, remember when you called me a hoe? Find your voice, gang. You have a moral, ethical responsibility to use the voice and the convictions and the gifts that God poured out to you. Start being a servant of your gifts. And I promise you, if we work with you, I will not call you a hoe, at least to your face. Anybody else? Question?
Hello.
Hi.
One of the challenges, like I love what you're saying about this providing feedback, challenging people. However, what happens with the current generation, that like the new people that are coming up that have have a lot of difficulty when you challenge them and when you say, look, here's how should you do it that way? Should you not do it that way? What advice do you have so that we can apply these principles with really younger generations?
So when you're afraid, you're asking me what is your advice when you're afraid on how to do this? Am I hearing that?
No, it's not that you're afraid. It's that, for example, younger people, if you challenge them, they react really negatively. And part of what you're saying is that sometimes you need to challenge people so that they can become better.
So we're dealing with a lot of that with Generation Z right now. Generation Z has been, and guys, I'm talking from a sociological perspective. This is what my doctorate is in. We have a lot of kids who were raised by helicopter parents who are soft as all get out. They have not been taught grit. Whenever they had a bad day, mommy and daddy would call the teacher and rescue them, and they have no idea how to deal with pain and discomfort. So they get to work and say, I want to be the CEO within 2 years, and I want your office. And I'm the princess, and you better treat me like the princess because my mom has said I'm special. You guys have those folks? So here's how we deal with it. Tracy, my wife and my partner, had a conversation with one of them this past week. And here's how it went. You know what? You have a lot of potential. But you know, every time we give you feedback, you're always defensive. You got a million reasons why it's okay. And you know what? Here's the deal around here. We put everything on the table in this company. We fail forward. When we make a mistake, we celebrate the fact that you swung for the fence, but we're going to talk about how can we learn from that? How can we get better? And every time we talk about to you about getting better, you always repel us with your defensiveness. And I got to tell you, I am more concerned about your defensiveness than I am about your mistakes. Because if you continue to be defensive, you have told me what your ceiling of your growth potential is. There's three ways to let go of a person when it's time to cut loose and quit coaching. Number one, when you want their success more than they do. Number two, that their default when you give them feedback is to go to defensiveness. Because they cannot grow if they're going to be defensive because they are rejecting the very information that you are giving for their future. And third, when all they have to do is they point out the problems, but they never have a solution. So, ma'am, you need to have a conversation with Miss Princess and to let her know that we love you, but your defensiveness is not going to fly. Either you grow or you go. Tough conversation, but you better have them. And what we have found is the majority of that generation will rise up if you challenge them with that kind of direct leadership. I've got time for 2 more questions. Anybody else? Yes, sir, back in the back.
This is sort of an odd question, but sort of along the same lines. I come from the People's Republic of California, and when you have that bad egg on the bus that is causing all kinds of problems, and just telling them that it's time for them to find another place to go can cost you several $million, the system begins to work against you. So how do you deal with that?
Well, first of all, I'm not suggesting that you just make a impulsive. Sometimes when you've got someone who's become so intertwined in the success of your business and they're toxic, and especially if they've gotten ingrained, entangled in your revenue stream and in your client base, you just can't say. So you got to think through. You got to be smart. You got to work on a strategy. But in the book that we wrote called "Is Everyone on the Boat?", there's a group of people in every organization called thoughtful leaders. And they are your informal leaders who have the most trust of anybody in the organization. They have an influence pool of 12 to 18 people. And when they speak, people listen. Remember the commercial, Mikey? Well, I'm not going to try it. Well, I'm not going to try the cereal. Let's let Mikey try it. Remember that? You have some Mikeys in your organization who have more informal influence than that naysayer. And what I've learned, especially if you're new to a team, you want to say to those thoughtful leaders, look, you have more influence, more trust among this organization than anybody here, and I need your help. And because thoughtful leaders want a transparent culture, they want a culture where people can speak their mind, they want a culture that's above the table, they want the kind of culture we're talking. And what I've learned is if you were partner with those thoughtful leaders and say, look, with Billy Butthead, when he does that, I need your help. In the meeting, if he misbehaves, I'm not telling you what to do, but I need your leadership. And what happens, that sideways peer pressure begins at least to neutralize the toxicity of your naysayers until you have enough time to live out your plan. Does that make sense? I wish I could go into a lot deeper detail, but I don't have the time. Get that book. It's only $14, and I think there's 3 or 4 freebies out there. Is everyone on the boat? Okay, just call my office. We have a few left. I'm serious. We want to have an impact with you all. One more question, we're going to wrap it up. Yes, sir.
Can you briefly tell us about 2 things and how we can quickly identify the narcissistic people we want to avoid?
No. 5 ways to spot a naysayer. You ready? Here we go. This is worth your conference right here. Number 1, you can never solve their problem. They are addicted to chaos. If you solve their problem, what will they have to do? They have to create another one, because what makes them safe is chaos. When your team is coming together and you're making momentum and there's cohesiveness, your team's going, yes, a naysayer will look at that and go, something's wrong, you're sick. And they mean it because their filter is so skewed. So, and you all think about the people in your organization. Whenever there's a crisis, somehow they're always around. They're always around. Number two, they are masters of passing the baton. They are natural, gifted leaders, but they don't inspire, they manipulate. And they are smart enough to know that if people start spotting me in the middle of every time there's a crisis or an argument or a blow up, they're going to start figuring it out who's causing it. So what they do is their masters are going up to people and saying, you know, what'd you think about that meeting today? Wasn't that a joke? What'd you think? Well, and because they won't pick on the strong ones, they'll pick on the weak ones who are afraid because they're emotional bullies, and they'll say, you know, what do you think you're going to go see Chris for lunch? You think you ought to mention that to Chris? Well, I don't know. I think that's a great idea on your part. Why don't you go to Chris? And they're masters at getting all these people stirred up. And then what do? They step back and let them fight. And if you come to them and say, I think you got this stirred up, what do? Every time, they'll throw that person under the bus. So number one, you can never solve their problem. Number two, they're masters of passing the baton and using other people, getting them stirred up to pass their agenda. Third, they are masters of meetings after the meeting. In the meeting, they'll go, yeah, I can live with it. After the meeting, they go out and they begin to undermine you in a nanosecond. Number four, they use rude manners to gain power over other people who are afraid to stand up for themselves. They are your bullies in an organization. You know people like that? And there's one other one I forgot. You're going to have to read the book. What is it? Tracy, are you there? What is it? I can't think of it. But those are four. Those are four. They're good ones. You all, if you allow a naysayer to go without account, I just want you to know you're not leading, they are, and everybody knows it, and you've given your credibility away. The cool thing is how can you neutralize your naysayers without making them martyrs? And you do that by building your culture and creating what is called trust accelerators. And I don't have time to tell you about that. But that'll be another time. Has today been helpful? Okay. Thank you all.